Well, gentlemen, here we are. It is a beautiful day in Utah and or Canada, depending on your perspective. I assume.
Beautiful.
Is it beautiful up there? Good.
Unbelievable. It's the 1 week a year where you can shed your outerwear and wonder what that incredibly intense light in the sky is.
Yes, I remember when I spent a summer in England, I had to tell them, you guys should try this. We at home we keep this big giant ball of nuclear fusion up in the sky. It just keeps everybody nice and toasty. You guys should look into one of those.
Yeah, it's so bright it'll kill you.
Yeah, don't look at it. Yeah. Don't follow Donald Trump's example. Anywho, yes. Hey, Uncle Mark, I think you're going to tell us about somebody today. Is that true?
Yeah, we in our journey around the globe, we love to meet groups of people, don't we? We love to explore and get to know folks because that's kind of what we're about is building bridges, Dan. That's who we are, and we're gonna meet a real piece of work that had a religion and that kind of got rolled up. So in today's we're going to meet the United Nuwabian Nation of Moors.
Oh, and, wow.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys remember these guys. They were in the way that at my age I kind of remember evening news stories about the Rajneeshis in Oregon that has, of course, that were recently the world met in Wild Wild Country.
Right.
On Netflix and all that craziness. There was a lesser but similar kind of old memory of this group of people who also had a compound in a small town, and things just kind of came off the rails. So we're going to talk about these folks. So they went through many incarnations, but what finally became known as the Nuwabian Nation was founded by a guy named Dwight York. Little aside, he had many more names than that, lots of aliases, and we'll get to them.
Oh, sure.
But born in Brooklyn in 1935, he also claimed he was born in New Jersey, and he also claimed he was born in Ghana before he claimed he was born on the 19th planet of the 19th galaxy. So, you're going to detect a pattern with this guy. So we'll get into all those patterns. So he got
that
involved.
Pattern is progressive truths.
I love that jump from New York to New Jersey to Ghana to the 19th planet. All right.
Yeah. Well, baby steps until you develop the warp drive. But
right.
He's really amazing. He believes in evolution, just the evolution of his ideas. So
right.
But his ideas kind of come from a much larger umbrella, which was and still is called Pan-Africanism. Pan-African is not the Pan-African movement is not necessarily a bad thing, and usually quite the contrary. It sprung up in the 60s as a way to help rebuild black societies shattered and divided by the slave trade, and instill pride and political empowerment for the African involuntary diaspora in the Caribbean and the Americas. So its famous adherents are such people as Marcus Garvey, W.E.B. Du Bois, and Malcolm X.
Right.
Huh. So
and the idea came from the notion that all of these slaves didn't have any. There was no documentation as to what part of Africa they came from, or where. Like they didn't have access to their actual roots. So it became a sort of celebration of all of Africa as being. As being sort of their homeland. Is that right? Did I get that sort of correct?
Yeah, that's kind of that's kind of like the foundation of it, is that what they all had in common was Africanness.
Right.
And of course they don't know whether they were from, Niger or Benin or, Nigeria or or now, and of course now amazingly a lot of black folks are able to trace that back, and that's really cool that they're kind of. A friend of mine recently did that. And kind of found out his story, or the fragments of his story.
On top of the fact that a lot of those borders and boundaries were imposed on Africans by colonial powers, so you know what I mean. So even if it turns out you're from Ghana or whatever, that may not be the tribe.
Right.
You know what I mean.
Precisely right. And Pan-Africanism also is it is a response not only to the horrors of the slave trade and to the dislocation that former Africans feel and that the children of Africa feel, but also a response to colonialism and its ongoing shit, right? So,
white people.
exactly. We'll talk about that too. So, they had Marcus Garvey and Malcolm X and W.E.B. Du Bois, but they also had Muammar Gaddafi. So we won't let a few bad apples spoil the barrel. So the same movement that sought to deal with issues of post-colonial Africa as well, contending with the suffering caused by minority apartheid rule in South Africa, et cetera, et cetera. So a movement that was set up to fight apartheid and work to rebuild lives and societies after the ravages of slavery and colonialism, working to bring something close to democracy to Jamaica, giving black youth around the world a sense of deep cultural identity, all good things. But a few less positive things sprung out of this reclaiming of lost identities. And like anything else, any good idea is just waiting for an asshole to come along and use it for unsavory ends.
Sure.
And you'll see with our new friend Dwight York, and this is fun, our new friend Dwight York, a.k.a. Malachi Z. York, a.k.a. H.E. Dr. Malachi Z. Kabina York T.M., a.k.a. Grand Mufti Divan Noble Reverend Dr. Malachi Z. York L. Deep breath. A.k.a. Isa El Had El Mahdi. A.k.a. I can't even read this. Naya Malakizodok L. A.k.a. Imperial Grand Potentate Noble, Reverend Dr. Malachi Z. York, 33rd degree / 772nd degree. Okay. And all his co-religionists were some of those very assholes.
Oh, my God.
That was a long way.
That is amazing. When was he P. Diddy? Puff?
I get it all going
confused.
to poop when I get to the P. Diddy part. Dwight, whatever his name is, and his group fall under what the Southern Poverty Law Center call the Black Supremacy Movement.
Okay.
Along with the Black Israelites and the Nation of Yahweh and a few other notables. Some of those, no doubt, we're going to talk about in future episodes because they're also really fascinating. So beyond the idea of empowering and rebuilding a larger African identity after centuries of slavery and the lesser horrors that continue to this day, black supremacy goes quite a few steps further. It's exactly what it sounds like. White supremacy, but black, right?
Right.
It's racism. So now I get it. White supremacy, not so much. Why are white people so mad at black people when it's other white people that are the cause of all their problems, right?
Sure.
It's because they're idiots who refuse to understand the real reason their factory jobs went away. But with black supremacy, sure, you can tease out just a little thread and see why maybe they could hate white people.
I want it to be noted right now that Uncle Doug and Uncle Dan are waiting to decide whether we sign on to what Uncle Mark is about to say. I'm just putting that out there.
We'll edit that part out. They agree with. Thank you for agreeing with everything exactly as I said it. So York and his Nuwabians, just like the Black Israelites, dress up their racism in a bunch of garbage racial theory cooked up from the same stupid swamp white supremacist racial theory comes from. Hint: the Bible. And some very, very peculiar interpretations of it that I'll get to in a sec. So at the end of the day, it's really just racism. So by 1967, York was becoming a player in the Black Power movement in Brooklyn, and there he founded a plethora of different groups. This guy in names, man, such as Holy Tabernacle Ministries, so far so good, the Ancient Order of Melchizedek,
Ooh.
All Eyes, spelled E-Y-E-Z, on Egypt, the Egyptian Church of Charist, and he was very, very adamant about not spelling Egyptian here with a Y. It's Egiptian, so know that.
Okay.
The Holy Baptist Synagogue, and, of course, Lodge 19 of the Ancient and Mystic Order of Malakizodok, before eventually landing on what would be his last creation, the United Nuwabian Nation of Moors. So York's ideas were a crude pastiche of pre- and post-Islamic African identities, specifically the polytheism of ancient Egypt with a dash of Christian magic, mostly from the Old Testament, some Jewish mysticism for good measure, Freemasonry because obviously, etc. But his crazy syncretic collage was much more than that. So Dan, you remember when we talked about syncretic ideas, yeah?
Obviously.
You basically take all the ideas you stole from someone else and throw them in a pot, turn up the heat until you get a stew that you can somehow call your own. But
it's philosophical gumbo.
It is a gumbo, and everybody's welcome, except white people. So let's let a journalist named Adam Heimlich of the New York Press, who wrote about Dwight York's, yes, hip-hop career, explain a little more about the sources of York's ever-evolving cosmology and Nuwabian religious doctrine. And I quote, "A partial list from my notes of places I'd encountered Nuwabian notions before includes Chariots of the Gods and the Raelian embellishments of that book, conspiracy literature, UFO literature, the human potential movement, Buddhism and New Age, astrology, theosophy, and Blavatsky, who we'll have to talk about at length another time, Leonard Jeffries and other Afrocentrics, Case, Lyndon LaRouche, alternative medicine, self-help literature, Satanism, the Atkins diet, numerology, and yoga."
Glad we got Atkins in there.
he just wanted to eat more meat. Come on.
Yeah.
And many of these York mentions by name. There are also extensive discourses on the Torah, Gospels, and Quran, as well as Rastafarianism, the Nation of Islam, and the 5% Nation. Those are also black identity groups. So,
okay.
at around the point of founding the United Nuwabian Nation of Moors, York had pretty much settled on a blend of UFO mysticism, Native American dress and animist beliefs, and Kemetism. Now, Uncle Dan, I know you're a celebrated Kemetic and could prattle on for hours on the subject, but I'll just explain a little for the good of the people so you don't go on a tear.
It's kind of you.
And
I can be long-winded.
You can go on and on about your chemetry. So Kemetism with a K is basically Egyptian neo-paganism. So if you think of your friend who has a Buddha statue and gets their tarot done and likes crystals, it's that, but for black people. So York began to rub all the other black Afrocentric identity religious leaders the wrong way in Brooklyn.
Weird.
So in 93, he was not a popular man among them. So in 1993, he packed up the crazy train and moved south to the unsuspecting Eatonton, Georgia, which is about 60 miles outside of Athens, where he and a few hundred followers built Tama-Re, a low-rent Luxor of foam pyramids and Egyptian statuary. And there's pictures of it online. It's kind of amazing, like how kind of small town carnival it looks.
Yeah, I'll bet. I'll bet it was delightful.
It's delightful.
The henge from Spinal Tap.
Yeah, it's got a henginess to it that's pretty charming. So for one final time, he changed his name, this time to our own Pharaoh Neter-A-F-Erti Atum-Re, becoming the first and maybe last Egyptian pharaoh of rural Putnam County, Georgia.
Never say never.
So now that he arrived at kind of his almost last stop, let's take a little dive into his beliefs. So the beliefs of the Nuwabian nation as it kind of settled in Georgia. He insisted that Native Americans were actually descended from black Africans who moved to that part of Pangaea that would later become North America before the continents drifted apart just a brief 200 million years ago. Also, like David Icke, who we talked about last week, he was obsessed with the Illuminati and the Bilderbergs and all those kind of classics, right?
Sure.
And then again, here's where his kind of racist, his amazing race theory comes into play. In 2004, he wrote, the Caucasian has not been chosen to lead the world. They lack true emotions in their creation. We never intended them to be peaceful. They were bred to be killers with low reproduction levels and short lifespans. Another explanation has
Caucasians... they did a shit job of engineering us. If that's what happened, they did the world's most piss poor job of engineering because, frankly, we ended up doing all the things they didn't want us to.
Right? Like, whose fault is that?
Right?
Right? We gained self-awareness at some point and fucked it all up. That's why you don't fuck around with this stuff.
Have you seen how many children we can have? It's amazing.
Exactly. Yeah, I love. He never met a Mormon family, I guess. So
Yeah.
another of his racial theories was that Caucasians descended from our old friend Cain. And,
yay! He flipped it.
Yes.
Why not turn that? He just took all white nationalist bullshit and just did a word search, replaced white with black.
Find and replace.
Added a record scratch. He just turned that frown upside down, didn't he? So, right. Adam and Eve were sent. This is me quoting him. Adam and Eve were sent to the Aegean Islands between Asia and Europe, where they started having children, and each couple's firstborn child was an albino, and those albinos were called Cain in the Bible, and Cain is short for Caucasian.
Oh, so in biblical times they were using English then.
Well, he had some really interesting language ideas, which I'll cover in a sec. But because this was happening around the same time as the Heaven's Gate people, the superficial similarity of York's beliefs to those of the Heaven's Gate cult led some to worry that the group's mass suicide during the appearance of the comet Hale-Bopp in 97, that York and the Nuwabians were planning a similar forever sleepover, which luckily didn't occur.
Yeah.
So, however, he would self-destruct in a comparably horrible fashion soon enough. So, and this is really one of my favorite parts. You'll love this. He taught this kind of a hilarious notion of pseudo-etymologies or pseudo-language. Okay. That basically there are truer hidden origins of common words that differ from the understood definitions. Here's a few. Believe, the word believe, actually is be-lie Eve, which means to lie to Eve's children. and it gets better.
Go ahead. Sorry.
As I say, Caucasian actually comes from carcass Asian, meaning white people are degenerated Asians.
Oh man, I just want to. I'm just picturing all of his people sitting in a room and just yelling out words for him to just deconstruct. Do mountain. That comes from mounting 10 people. Every mountain has 10 people underneath it. So
it's amazing how hidden in plain sight all this meaning is, right?
Right.
We could have known this all along. So
if only we had such a good interpreter.
But we are carcass Asians, and therefore also albino Cain people, right? From the Mediterranean, I suppose. So the word God, G-O-D, comes from, as he says, the Hebrew letters Gomar, Oz, and Dubar, signifying wisdom, strength, and beauty. The only problem is Hebrew does not have an O, right? And the names for G and D are Gimel and Dalet, respectively, not Gomar and Dubar.
Gomar and Dubar.
I remember Gomar and Dubar. That wasn't Mayberry. What was that one? I'm trying to figure out which show they were on.
I think those were Saddam Hussein's nephews, weren't they? So
it was two of the 7 brothers for the 7 brides were Gomar and Dubar.
And then lastly, of course, this one is my favorite. Jesus is a combination of the words Jah and Zeus.
Right.
Yeah.
Boo.
Right.
That makes, I mean, what's good about that is that we get the Jah part in, which makes a lot of sense when you think about it.
So, amazing wordplay for a guy that was apparently not an insignificant player in the hip hop world of the 90s. And I just could not put myself through trying to find any of his music on YouTube. But apparently there are claims that he had quite a bit of influence on 90s hip hop, up to and including that the Nuwabian belief that they were somehow Native Americans, as I explained inexplicably earlier, led to who was it? Andre 3000. Who was that band?
Outkast.
Led to that really controversial Grammys performance with Outkast when they had teepees and Native American outfits.
Oh shit! That was because they were buying into his bullshit.
That is what is alleged. So wow. I don't know if there's any proof for that, but this is not a court of law, and that doesn't matter.
Okay, so I have a question.
Yeah.
I'm pretty good with geography. I don't know of a country called Nuwabi or Nuwabia.
You're assuming that's a country? I was assuming a planet.
Oh.
Well, I think it comes from a Nubian.
Corrected.
The idea of Nubians as Black Africans.
I see. Yeah, sure.
And then he just put his little spin on that.
Gotcha.
So who knows what that means and who really cares? So he insisted, getting back to the less fun stuff here, he insisted that the family unit, of course, like most cult leaders and religious leaders, is the building block of society. But on his compound, he kept couples separated from each other, and even their children separated them for months at a time. That's called foreshadowing. And couples were only allowed any intimate contact maybe once every 3 months if they were in his favor or at all. So
I'll bet they could contact him if he thought they were sexy.
Yeah. So, fellas, with all that amazing shit going on, how in the world did this paradise of reason and sanity come to an end, do you think?
I'm gonna guess that we're talking a bang, not a whimper.
Right, if the pattern holds.
Whatever the pattern, whatever you're thinking, you're right. So somebody sent an anonymous letter to the county authorities alleging widespread child abuse in the membership. So the FBI took a look-see, and within months they had a major task force set up, undercover task force to investigate. So long story short, without going into too graphic detail, here's a quote from a book by Bill Osinski, who's a reporter that covered them for years in Georgia and then wrote a book about it after the smoke cleared. So,
sure.
Quoting him, he said, "When York was finally indicted, state prosecutors literally had to cut back the number of counts listed from well beyond 1,000 to slightly more than 200 because they feared a jury simply wouldn't believe the magnitude of York's evil." It is believed to be the nation's largest child molestation prosecution ever directed at a single person in terms of number of victims and number of alleged criminal acts.
Holy shit.
Yeah. And just a little side note, some of those indictments were involving children as young as 4. So it ended exactly as you guys thought. Just good news. He's eligible for parole somehow in 2022.
What?
So look out for a foam pyramid to pop up in your neck of the woods in the not so distant future.
He's gonna set up shop in the basement of a pizza joint in Jersey.
That's right.
Ooh. Topical.
I have a feeling that he's probably not going to get paroled with that kind of body count, but that was pretty much game over for the Nuwabians. Their compound was auctioned off, and all the pyramids were torn down. You can go on YouTube and see some of his followers still insist on his innocence, and they talk about the court case and the appeals. And he argued in court that he was not couldn't be tried under the jurisdiction of the United States because he was a sovereign person and all that garbage. So
right.
You can also hear some of his really poor recording quality ramblings about white people and the origins of race, et cetera, but it's not as amusing as you might think. It's just kind of incoherent and rambling and sad. But just at the end of all this, and I don't know how many times we've come to the same conclusion on this segment, and we'll continue to, I will never stop being not amazed about the phenomenon that begins with some guy creating a new church/cult, so frequently ending with that guy committing sexual crimes against children.
Right.
Yeah, well, it seems to be like one of the primary motivators.
Right.
Yeah, you don't have to pay taxes, and you are literally able to hide so much of your activity behind the separation of church and state, and the First Amendment, that it's kind of frightening. And I honestly think if anybody hangs out a shingle as prophet, we ought to have a look at their hard drive. That's just
honestly, yeah, that's the first thing that happens.
A beautiful dream of mine, but it'll probably never happen. So
No.
That's the Nuwabian nation, guys.
Wow, that's it's funny. You talked about his hip hop career, and I was like, well, I'd go and listen to some of his hip hop music, but I can't imagine him getting past the first. My name is blank. He doesn't even good luck.
40 minutes later, you're wondering what the fuck is going on.
Not,
right?
not a lot of words rhyme with mufti.
All right, Uncle Doug.
You'd be surprised.
Uncle Mark, thank you so much. Let's move on.
Moving on.